Welcome to a brand new episode of the South Coast Property Podcast. The South Coast Property Podcast is here to give you, the listeners, insight into the world of property on the South Coast. I'm going to be talking to experts in property, estate agents, developers, to photographers, solicitors, and more, all in aid to help you, whether you are looking to move, if you already live here and want to sell and move, or have a property and want to develop it. My guests will use their expertise and local knowledge to help you. Today's guest is Grace Watson, who runs her own independent estate agency, Grace Green Homes, listing and selling unique properties throughout the home counties, including Hampshire. So I'm going to be talking to Grace about how Grace Green Homes can sell your unique property, how she builds trust with the seller, how she lists and sells your home, her advice on selling and buying, and more. Grace, welcome to the South Coast Property Podcast.
Thanks very much. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me and inviting me on. Looking forward to having a really good chat with you today.
You. So, Grace, just to begin, can you give us an insight in how you got into the property industry and found yourself running your own independent estate agency?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, like many estate agents, actually, I mean, I don't think anyone wakes up one day desperate to be an estate agent, but it's funny now that I'm in this position. You look back to way back when, or when I was a child, and I was, even when I was little, I was always kind of fascinated with A Place in the Sun, or Kirsty and Phil, and I think a lot of kids would probably find that quite boring, but I was always really happy to have it on in the background whenever my mum was watching it. So maybe it was a sign, I don't know. But yeah, I started as a Saturday viewer for a big kind of corporate agency in Hampshire when I was at senior school and I was doing my A levels. Just to get a bit of cash in and develop my kind of personal skills. And I was hoping to go to university to do international business studies. Got my place, finished A levels and kind of the trauma of exams and whatnot, and thought, oh, I don't know, I can do another 3-4 years of study exam. So I'd been, working, weekends for a while, really enjoyed it, and just decided to take a year out between college and uni and work full time as a lettings agent. So really enjoyed it. And that kind of was the bug, I loved earning my own money. I had a little Corsa company car, which at 17, just passed my test, was the best thing ever. And met some great people and just really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the fact that it brought out all of these kind of interpersonal skills that I had and these soft skills that I knew I had, but you're not necessarily able to kind of quantify when you're at college or university, maybe. And so I decided to let go of the idea of going to uni and continued with my my career for that particular company. Hopped over from lettings to sales and was given the opportunity within kind of 18 months to go and work at a new branch, still with the same company over in Sunningdale and Ascot, kind of on the Berkshire Surrey border. Which was just an incredible experience, especially at that age. The exposure to some beautiful homes, brilliant area, and lots of, a huge diverse pool of individuals with lots of different needs and nationalities and requirements. So that just kind of cemented, I think, my love and my interest for the world of property. And yeah, over time, developed my career with that company. I kind of got a little bit fed up with working in a sales office. This is back when, we were still working Monday to Saturday most weeks. Finishing office hours were like 8 till 7. We'd have call rounds to stay on. We kind of bribed with pizza on a Wednesday night, till 8 or 9 o'clock. And I'm quite an empathetic person. I used to hate bothering people. I found that quite that kind of cold calling just wasn't really for me. I was always interrupting bedtime or bath time or dinner time or something, and I hated it. Anyway, and so I moved into the marketing team just to change things up a little bit. And I've always been quite visual, quite creative. And I remember being frustrated for a while, actually, that especially over in Sunnydale and Ascot, we had these beautiful homes, but our marketing was just no different to the branch I've worked in before in Farnborough, for example. Um, and it was also no different to any of our competitors. You know, we had Knight Frank across the road who were also arguably they had a more attractive brand, but the marketing was all more or less the same. So I worked in the marketing team for a while, and I was probably a nightmare to work with because I was always trying to, oh, what about this? Or why don't we try this? Or there was one Valentine's Day, for example, we were trying to put a Valentine's post together. And I was going through all of the property images and that we had for this um, brand I was working for the agency. And at this point, there were maybe, I don't know, 25, 30 branches. So we had some good stock. And the imagery and the photos and the quality of the marketing that we had, as I was trying to find, you know, houses with pink or red bits in them to tie it in, was just atrocious. And I was so frustrated, and I thought, I can't believe we're still doing this. Um, so anyway, I decided to then move back into sales, and an opportunity came up to work as a marketing and sales manager for another brand, which I did. And again, they were very well established in that particular location, but traded mainly off of reputation. So their marketing was arguably worse than the company I'd worked for before. Um, and personally, it was a real challenge to kind of, right, let's rebrand the brand, but also let's refresh our marketing. And that came just as we were kind of coming into lockdown and navigating the COVID era. So yeah, there was lots to be done there. There was lots of change that we could make and become a little bit more creative with marketing of homes, introducing video, a different style of presenting property, and really trying to increase the quality. Just on the cusp of a big change in the industry generally. And then from there, I went to work for an independent business in the Cotswolds. So spent about 18 months there. And again, kind of back into that high end realm, dealing with really interesting properties. And it was at that point I thought, "Do you know, like I'm just so desperate to do this for myself. And I really think that there's a market for this, you know, nearer to home." So yeah, that opportunity came to an end, and I pulled my socks up, kind of covered my eyes for my bank balance, and gave it a go. And we're now in month 11. So just peeping up the top of the parapet after what's been a great year, but yeah, challenging in lots of ways.
So you say you spotted the market for selling these, unique homes. So for anyone who's listening, Chris, maybe they're more used to those corporate chains, um,
Yeah.
estate agents. What what sets you apart? What makes you different when it comes to selling those high end homes? What's the advantage to using an independent estate agent like yourself?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, independent estate agents initially are independent because they have a passion to execute something that they just couldn't within the confines of a corporate agency or their role within a corporate agency. And on this journey, I've met so many other independent business owners, or they are self-employed estate agents under, you know, a brokerage model, which is also really becoming quite popular in the UK. It's massive in America, and it's massive in Australia, and it's now kind of catching on here. And I think the reason that independent and the brokerage models are doing so well is because the people are really passionate, you know, and you get the service that those individuals wish that they could have offered in a corporate setting. A prime example of that is finishing a viewing last Friday, and I'm sat on the driveway messaging the owner just with a big on update, and she kind of popped up and waved and said, "Oh, we're back now. Do you want to come in for a drink?" And an hour and a half later, you know, we're sat around the table talking about our families and how excited they are for the rest of the year, and you know, really personal things to them that they're sharing with me, and vice versa. And we're building, you know, and have built a really great relationship. But it sort of cements the idea that actually selling your home is never really about the home. Marketing your home is, but selling your home a lot of the time isn't. It's about you and your wants and needs and desires to move forward in your life for whatever reason. And I think sometimes we need to remember that that's not always a really positive reason, you know? The reasons could be very sentimental. And so all of that requires trust. And I really like to think that the clients that I am working with at the moment, if you were to ask them, I'd really hope that they would say that they trusted me. My communication's clear. I do what I say I'm going to do. But the conversations we have are always much bigger than this is the feedback from the viewing, or this is what I think you should do. It's kind of, it becomes much more of an experience. And I've always been that person, but I've just never had the time until now to dedicate that level of service. I always like to think I was a really good agent, but now I think I'm a great agent, and that is because I have the time to execute what feels natural to me. And I hope a lot of independent agents would agree with that. But I'm also very, I mean, my attention to detail, with a lot of things is probably excruciating. I would say my photographer and videographer, uh, curses me, I'm sure, after or on most shoots, because we'll take a photo and I'll go, "Oh my God, I didn't move the keys off of," and we're trying to curate, I guess, uh, almost like a magazine effect. We're selling the lifestyle of living in a particular home, and that is what unique homes really deserve. We were speaking just before, John, about the typical kind of client that owns a unique home, and that's something that I give thought to, again, because I am interested in that, and I have the time to actually consider who's going to buy this home, who's bought the home, what circumstances might surround these people, what lifestyle do they want to achieve living here. And then we can execute that in the marketing that we produce. Whereas you just can't. I don't believe that you can really get that level of detail, with a kind of corporate high street agent.
Yeah. Are there any misconceptions that you still have to dispel? Someone's considering you and might think, "Well, can you this, or can you do this for me, or whatever it may be." Does that still come across for
It
you?
can do. Yeah, it can do. I think, interestingly, lots of people are attracted to, I go out to see homes that have been on the market for a while, and at that point, people want to try something different. If I had a pound for every time someone has said to me, "With we're bored of this now. We want to move. We don't care what it takes, but we love what you do, and it's really visual, and we want to try something different." So that is great. But there is also, I think, sometimes a misconception, as you said, or a fear perhaps, that we don't have access to buyers because we are smaller, or independent. And I don't have the personal, business budget of, the high street agent, to spend on, completely spreading your home absolutely everywhere. But what I will do is understand who's going to buy it and make sure those people see it. And when they see it, it's presented immaculately and in a style that is tasteful to them. And so for me, I think that's much more effective than the kind of mass market blanket approach that you may get from, a corporate agent. But ultimately, most people will start their search online now. I don't have a high street office, for example. I know some independent agents that do. For them, it's a comfort blanket because they are visible every day, regardless of whether, people passers-by are thinking of moving or not. And so that's a kind of safety blanket for them, which I completely understand and I did consider for a while. But actually, for me, I find allocating that, the budget that I have saved by not doing that on the marketing of my homes is more effective. And now when you're scrolling through Rightmove, which again most independent agents or brokerages do, the marketing really pops and it stands out. And that to me is much more effective than being on every single portal with substandard marketing. So I think that probably the biggest fear is, okay, well, we don't have a giant database, or I don't have an office affiliated to me in Glasgow, just in case that's where the buyer's coming from. I think really those days of estate agency have moved on.
Yeah. We'll come on to how you find buyers later, but I want to just talk about the relationships that you build, which which you mentioned um, a minute ago. Because given the types of properties that you are selling, for anyone listening who would consider you, how important is building that relationship to you, and and how important is it? Is it for for the seller? And yeah, I imagine that that's quite an important thing given the types of properties that you're selling.
Yeah, absolutely, hugely. I think, as cheesy and as repetitive as it sounds, we've all heard the saying that people buy from people. And when you're working in a corporate environment, you still have to carry that. I really hope these clients like me. You've got that on the left side, but on the right side, you've got, well, I need to go back to the office with this instruction. Whatever it takes, I need to win this listing, or I need to get an offer, or I need to have secured a price reduction. You're constantly battling between your affiliation with your client and your affiliation with whoever you're working for. And the two don't always work in the best interest of the client. Um, Whereas now, I right from the off, when I first go and meet a client, my advice will always be honest. If a home's been stuck on the market for a year and it's really not selling and it's been reduced, so they've tried the high street agents, my advice might not always be what someone wants to hear, in that, no, you don't need to reduce the price. And no, there's nothing wrong with your home. And, every home is beautiful and unique and special to the person that's living in it. But sometimes you need to take a step back and actually look at it from a prospective buyer's point of view. And that may sometimes mean redecorating the dining room from blood red to something much more neutral, or, moving some furniture around, or decluttering or depersonalizing. And that to me is a really, really important part of our process. Because it sets the seller up to be successful. Whereas again, I think if that advice isn't well taken and they want to try another corporate agent, that they're more than welcome to. That's just not my style, because I want to sell the home as much as the client does. So there's that initial stage, I guess, of unpicking the experience so far, and again, as I said earlier, tapping into the psychology of who's going to buy this house and how does it need to look. You need to be presented at its best for that particular person. Um, so there's that element of it, and I hope that thereafter, we're building on a relationship of trust, because it's been a very honest conversation from the start. And like I said, moving home is a really evocative process. I have bought, I've tried to sell. I'm a landlord, so I've got tenants. So I've had those challenging experiences myself, but I've also recently seen family members, close to me, going through the process. And it's only at that point, I think, when it comes back to you and your circumstances, that you realize on a personal level, wow, this is a big thing. Memories have been made here, children have been born, in some people's homes. That's where their young family has grown up. I've had clients who have, recently lost their partner, and they've been living in a home for 40 years with the love of their life that's no longer there. And they're having to wrap their head around moving somewhere on their own. So they're conflicted between being really excited about what the future holds, but equally being so distraught at letting the past go. And that's the side of property and estate agency that I think a lot of people forget, is that, it's lovely having beautiful houses marketed really well, but underneath all of that is a seller or a family who are moving for very personal reasons. So the relationship has to reflect that. And otherwise, we are no different. We're just good at marketing. So yeah, so I'd say it's an absolute non-negotiable for me. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing you're absolutely spot on. I think it is crucial, and like you said, the reasons for selling may be very personal, and
Mm.
respect that, and yeah, treat them well, and looking after. You said it's a huge thing selling a home that you you've may have worked really hard for. It means an awful lot to you, and that's massively important. And so, a great way that you showcase and sell these homes for people is through the videography that you use, photography. So yeah, it's all really high quality. We talked about this before recording. How important is all of that to selling these homes? Particularly the type of properties that you get to list. Um, how important is getting the photography, videography absolutely right and showcasing these properties in the best way?
I mean, I'd say for me, it is a complete non-negotiable. My business wouldn't be the same. And I've recently shown couples around a house that had been listed before for a year with another high street agent, and they, in their own way and in many ways, are a great agent. They're well established. They've been around for a long time. They're multi-branch, but they had bad luck or whatever you want to call it in selling this particular home, and we stripped everything back, completely remarketed it. And our marketing shoots, by the way, they take a full day a lot of the time. It's not a case that we're there for 5 or 10 minutes in each room, cramped up in a corner, with a camera, slightly wobbly hands. That was me about 12 years ago. I'd be sent off on a Saturday with a camera and, come back with what you can. And there are still agents that operate like that because it's as quickly as we can get this online, it's going to sell, and that's that. And I just don't think we're there now. The last few years financially have been really tough for people, and it's much more expensive to borrow the levels of money. You all know this, in comparison to 5, 6, 7 years ago, even. So buyers are much more cautious about where they're spending their money, how they're spending their money, and they need to really love somewhere if they're going to push themselves financially. Um, to commit to something that may ultimately be a struggle for them. And you're not going to do that if you're not completely encapsulated by the home that you're buying. And as we said earlier, everyone's search now starts online. So as far as I'm concerned, the media day takes as long as it takes. A lot of the time we're staying into the evening to capture twilight shots. Homes and gardens really come into their own at that time of day, and especially at this time of year. We have lots of clients who are panicking that, oh my goodness, the garden just looks awful. Can't we wait until the summer? Um, and yes, I'm sure the garden looks beautiful in the summer and much more colourful, but actually the twilight shots that we produce at this time of year are also nice and cozy, and they're inviting, and they make you think, oh, do you know, it would just be lovely to come home and snuggle up in front of the fire or whatever. So there's that side of that kind of emotional storytelling that we're trying to produce. And ultimately that's why we all chose the houses that we choose to live in, because we could see ourselves there. So yeah, for me, our business model would be very different if we didn't invest in that level of marketing, but it's also not left to chance. It's well thought through. There's psychology and reasoning behind that. Um so that's a big thing. But again, tapping into the psychology of our sellers, we were chatting just before, and many of our sellers have worked incredibly hard to own the houses that they own and that they're subsequently selling. They may be entrepreneurial and they've started their own business. They've built it to a level where they've sold the business, and they've got this beautiful home to thank for it, and that's kind of their life's work, and they're now selling that to move on. But you've got all of that backstory again, tied into this beautiful property, and what it means for them. So they're really keen for it to be presented in a way that they can relate to, and tapping into the reasons that they have loved it. So that's important to people, I think, not just for buyers, but for sellers too. Um, and again, we have beautiful brochures. A lot of people just think the days of brochures are gone. And again, 10, 12 years ago, I was flapping around in my tiny little Mini on a Saturday with sheets of paper and pictures everywhere. We've moved on from that, definitely. But we have, thick, really great quality magazine style brochures that a lot of care and attention is poured into, to utilize that marketing and the photography, and really put that to its best. So yeah, hugely important for both ends of the spectrum. And yeah, not wanting to ramble on, touching on videography. Again, a huge point of differentiation, but also because it's professionally done. For my own kind of social media or the odd kind of sneak preview, I'm pretty good with my phone. And I still present things professionally on social media, but for the actual property marketing and the bank of marketing that we're putting together, it's all professionally done, and that's an investment that comes from us. Sometimes the sellers wish to contribute towards that, um, but it's professionally done, and we have 4K cinematic, presenter led videos to point out the things that people might not have taken the time to realize when they're just flicking through photos. Again, not many people will read through a full description. So if you've got a super snazzy, levitating extractor fan that sort of pops up out of nowhere in the kitchen, you can convey that quite quickly and effectively in a video that most people would just find really boring in a photo or part of a description you wouldn't necessarily notice. So it's a great opportunity to really pinpoint the singing points of the house.
I think videography is a great addition for a stage, and particularly um, with these types of properties, showcasing them. And you're right, you read the full description, very rarely, and
Mm.
I think sometimes photos don't always do it justice. So I do like to, and like I say, your videography is fantastic. You use and so for anyone listening, I think there's a huge advantage um, to using you and given the investment that you put into it and the time that goes into it.
The team that we use that, are just as passionate about it as we are. And I think that's the thing, you were saying earlier about, are there any objections that I have to handle and concerns or misperceptions that people have? Yeah, it's all very well me really believing in strong marketing and evocative creative marketing, but if the teams that I hire in are happy to do a substandard job, then there's absolutely no point. They won't put their name to anything that isn't less than perfect or doesn't properly execute what we've tried to do. And they've built a really successful business around that, and my business for sure would not currently look the same if we weren't completely aligned on that. And that comes back, I think, to my values and how I want to operate as someone that owns a business. Welcoming people in to work with you and collaborate with you is great, but we have to be aligned um on the end product, and that I really believe that we are, and thankfully we always tend to execute well. So yeah.
Grace, one of the goals of the podcast is to give advice for anyone listening. You know, Obviously your main area is selling properties. So touched on that actually a minute ago about when you list properties that the sellers actually have to take a step back and look at it from a buyer's perspective, and kind of almost take the emotion out of it a little bit in terms of you might have to, like you said, declutter or take the personal things down, which is probably the main advice you can actually give anyone looking to sell. But what advice would you give for anyone looking to sell the unique style properties that you list?
I think the biggest thing for me would be to not overlook the presentation, and that's not necessarily just on the media day. It's a big commitment selling your house for many reasons, and it is a process. And it is difficult to keep on top of, and it is difficult, especially if I do sometimes feel with families who've got young children and they've got 2.5 Labradors and a cat that kind of wanders in and out and, spreads cat litter everywhere. And, it's a lot to keep on top of all of that, still live relatively normally, and keep you on top of your house where you're trying to sell. But it is worth it. I have one seller at the moment. Well, all of my sellers are lovely and their houses are always immaculate, but one in particular, every single viewing, I could bet my house on it. I will have a compliment about how the house smells. Um, and just give me a second here to explain because I know it sounds ridiculous, but walk in, and it doesn't matter where you are, it smells like you're in a spa. And there are, diffusers, the reed diffusers, um, in every other room. The house is always immaculate. They have pets. You wouldn't know that. Um, but I think you have to appreciate that people buy on scent, and I think when you're selling your home, it may look great, but actually, if it smells of the dog that's just come in that morning after a really soggy walk, or your dinner the night before, or it's really difficult to keep on top of all of these things. But without a doubt, some of my homes that get the most compliments smell great, they look great. And so, we more often than not will get second viewings on those homes much quicker than anything that, maybe is a little bit rushed and there's still paperwork strewn across the kitchen table. And so definitely don't overlook that element of it. But again, I think for sellers that are considering selling, I would argue that we have a much less seasonal market now. Again, I meet a lot of people that are saying, "Oh, I'm led to believe that April's a great time to sell, so I'm going to wait until then." Well, now, we're not far off April. We're having this conversation at the beginning of March. Um, but I think again, gone are the days where actually spring traditionally is the best time to sell. If your family needs or wants to move, then now is the best time to sell, regardless of the seasonality or the time of the year. Um, the spring months are great because again, it's lighter, the days are slightly longer. There's actually some color coming out of the ground and the trees are starting to pad out again. So there are all of those elements which are helpful, but the market is also busier. And so especially if you're hoping to achieve a prime price for your property or a premium price for your property, all of a sudden you've got much more competition. So again, unless your property is really going to stand out with great marketing and a great agent, you're going to find it that little bit tougher, I imagine, to get people through the door, because you've got that bit more competition. You've also got periods where children are off school. I think Easter's quite late this year. So I would anticipate that a good chunk of April is going to be taken up now by the Easter holidays. And traditionally, we will see a dip during that time of people that are away or otherwise engaged, or if they are viewing houses, they are coming with their 2.5 kids and the Labrador in the car. And so their full attention is not necessarily on the house and what it's like to live there. So I would say, yeah, try not to be led with seasonality. I agreed one sale at 5 o'clock in the evening in October when it was dark and rainy. It was the only time I wouldn't ordinarily do a viewing in the evening at that time of year, because obviously, you want it to be daylight. But this particular couple couldn't view it any other time during that week, and they were happy to see it in the evening. We had an hour-long viewing. By the time we'd finished, it was dark, and they wanted to offer. The difference there was that the house was well lit. It was lovely and warm. The underfloor heating was on. The fire was lit. The garden lighting was on. And so going back to what we were saying earlier about, twilight photography and how evocative that is, it can also be useful for people to experience your house at a different time of day. And all of the feelings that brings with it as well. People don't just live in houses in daylight in the summer. So thinking outside the box and just, trusting your agent that actually, once you understand and you locate the buyer, the ideal buyer, I think most houses should be profiled. Then it's much easier to kind of make sure that they do see the property and they see it in its best light.
The scent one's a really good one, actually, and you're absolutely right. Um, Probably easy to overlook, and not
Mm,
really think about, but it does make such a difference. We talked to another estate agent about smell of bread being, really good bed bacon in the morning, the kitchen smelling lovely, and it's just homely. We all like nice smells,
right.
so why wouldn't you do that for your home? And I like the idea about showcasing the homes at different times of the year or the different times of the day, and again, it all kind of goes back to how you market the property, though, because you've attracted a couple in that scenario that you mentioned for the October in the evening one where it's pitched black. They would have seen the property,
Mhm.
seen the video, seen the photos, and because of how well you showcase it is, what you show is kind of what you're going to get. So they might have felt that they didn't actually need to see it in the day, and actually, for them, it might have worked really well actually to see it then and see if it still lives up to what they saw and what they felt looking at it before actually they physically went to see it. Um, so yeah, I think
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I think this really highlights the fact that actually, it is harder to sell a house now than it has been before, for the reasons we've already spoken about, but also people are more particular. Life is much faster paced. We can go on, um, Amazon and have a choice, of if you want to order, I don't know, a pack of pens, you've got all of a sudden 12 million search results for pens. Dating apps. If you're trying to date, you could be getting along with someone fine, and then 2 minutes later, you've got another 5 people that you might also, we have choice everywhere. And the digitalization of estate agents is great. But equally, as you're scrolling through Rightmove, like, oh, that's a nice house, and then 2 houses later, oh, that's a lovely one. You have to make sure that absolutely nothing is left to chance. And that goes beyond the initial marketing, that goes for viewings as well. I had someone say to me the other day, which I joked is probably one of the best compliments I've had. Maybe not for the seller, because it ultimately was at their expense, but this couple said to me, "Oh, we did see this house last year, with the previous agent, but there was just something about it. We didn't book to come and see. We saw it online, but we didn't book to come and have a look, and I couldn't quite place my finger on it. And then we saw it relaunched the other week, and it just looked so inviting. And you used a shot of the garden in the evening with all the lighting on and the hot tub, and we thought, oh, do you know, let's go and see it. And that is the difference. You're talking 9 months there, that they first saw it online and discounted it because the marketing wasn't compelling enough. And yet it's relaunched again and they've decided to come back. Um, and I think that can't be overlooked. The power of all of that preparation and the media day, as much as it's a long day for us, it is also for our clients as well. A lot of effort goes into that. But it is worth it. Nothing is left to chance. And I think that's how you have to look at things now.
definitely. So you got the property listed.
Yeah.
How do you ensure you talked about a little bit about this earlier, but how do you go about finding the right buyers? And for anyone looking to buy these types of properties, what advice would you have for them? Is there anything that they need to be looking out for or need to consider? So yeah, two-pronged question. How do you find them? And any advice for them?
Yes, you might have to remind me of the second question because we'll go off on a tangent on the first one. How do we find the buyers? So, as with most estate agents, obviously everything is shared on Rightmove. At the moment, it is the leading portal. It's where most people associate house hunting. They have a huge marketing budget and their ads are all over the telly. So it is still the leading point that people go to start their search. But aside from that, we do also now invest heavily in social media. So as lovely as it is to have this bank of marketing material for each home, just popping it on Rightmove, I think is a waste. There's pockets of communities everywhere that you look online now. And again, it's something that me and my team have the time to invest in. So say I take a house on in Lymington, for example, and it's up on Rightmove, which is great. But we also need to target the local community because it's all very well hoping that someone looking to move to Lymington will see it on Rightmove. But imagine how many people potentially already in the local area would love to live in your home. And so we do still invest heavily in direct mail. So we have beautiful postcards made up, which kind of mimic. So this is an example of one of our brochures here. So they kind of mimic, the marketing that we have in our brochures or the front or the back. and it will have information about the house. It will have a QR code to the video, quite prominently on it. So that is organized and delivered to your local community physically. So it lands on the doorstep still for people that engage with that kind of marketing. And it's really obvious that within a few seconds, they can view your home online, and then follow up quite quickly. So that can be really, really effective for us. But second to that, the social media equivalent of that is to harness the communities and the groups that are already available, predominantly on Facebook. I think it's quite a generational thing. I'm finding I actually don't personally use Facebook a huge amount anymore. I've got a younger sister that uses it, much more frequently. But equally, my a lot of my clients would default to Facebook over Instagram. So you can't sort of forget one over the other. But Facebook is very good for creating lots of local groups, and that they might they might involve updates in the local area, what's going on in the community. But a few days a week, a lot of the time, you can advertise your business or particular things on these pages, and they have thousands and thousands of followers. So for me, making sure that my clients' homes and all this beautiful marketing that we've taken the time and effort to prepare is again delivered to that community digitally. So we share, and it's a free exercise. We share that on there, and then on Instagram. We've done quite well at building, a solid following so far, which, is starting to steadily grow organically of people that are looking for unique homes. And I know that because people reach out to me on those platforms and say, oh, when I want to sell my home, I'd love for you to sell it because this is how I'd love for it to be presented. Equally, if I show buyers around a particular property and it's not quite for them, they say, oh, we love the kind of homes that you sell. So, we're building this brand of selling beautiful and unique homes, things that are a little bit different. And we prove the marketing that we bring to really showcase those. But we are also building a community of people that want to buy those particular properties and are engaging time and time again the content that we're sharing. And that is so vitally important today, like I said, in this kind of digital age of consuming content constantly, to be nurturing this community online and sharing advice and, sharing properties and kind of advertising the lifestyle that buyers could have by buying one of them is really important. So that's also a big part of our strategy. We have a sort of by invitation club, which people can register to on our website, but also through social media. And before any of our marketing even goes on social media, which is often before it goes on Rightmove, we share the kind of top level fact video and some photographs with buying agents and also our by invitation club. So buyers that are registered, they're kind of hot to trot, they've been financially vetted and they're then looking in our area and or for our particular type of home. So that's also a great level of exposure. And now you're going to have to remind me of the second question, John.
So any advice for potential buyers for these types of properties? Is there anything they need to be looking out for, aware of, or to ask you as the agent looking to sell a property? Yeah, any tips for buyers out there?
I think my biggest tip for buyers would be to be as sure as you can be about where you want to live. And I say that, and it sounds very obvious, but one thing about operating in this niche is you see people that are carried away by how beautiful a home might look, and they'll go and view it, and the home is perfect, but then they're kind of a few steps back and realize that actually maybe the location isn't. And I've recently met people that are looking. I sort of start, are you specifically looking locally? Is there a particular draw to this area? And they've gone, no, the house is more important than the location. So we'll look anywhere within a 30-mile radius, which is great until they're completely overwhelmed and they've seen so many properties that they love, but they still can't decide where they want to live. And so for lots of buyers, it's a really obvious exercise. If you have young children or, you're thinking about starting a family, a lot of the time, as boring as it sounds, you're probably driven by local schooling options, and the ease and accessibility and the quality of education in that area. For some people, they're driven by access into London still for work. We had this mass exodus years ago of people during or after COVID with flexible working who moved out to the home counties and under the assumption that they either wouldn't have to commute into London very often or it might just be a couple of times a week. And now I think a lot of businesses are starting to backtrack on that. And I am seeing a lot of people now needing to move back into London or they're renting the houses out that they bought during that time and then renting in London. So I think that's caused some confusion and some difficulties for people. But my point is that if you have the luxury of being flexible of, in terms of where you want to live, um, it is a luxury and that's a great positive. But equally, you can't pick a house up and move it. And that's something that I've heard many times over the years. Oh, the house is perfect if I could pick it up and move it. So yeah, so that I would probably research first. There's nothing worse than breaking your own heart over a house that logistically isn't going to work. But also from a financial point of view, as again I've referenced a few times today, it is trickier out there, and you are far better placed than me to advise on this, John. But just making sure that you're not overstretching yourself. There is this dissonance at the moment where I would argue most of this year will continue being a buyer's market. And I kind of hate the phraseology of a buyer's market or a seller's market. But ultimately, by buyer's market, we're saying that, buyers still have the upper hand in that at the moment, there's not levels of, an unprecedented level of stock available. Statistically, there's more on the market now. I think about 25% more than there was a year ago, which is great. And I think it sets this year up nicely and shows that some normality after the last year of crazy politics and economics is starting to return and confidence is starting to return. But there is still trepidation, I think, and buyers are considering what they could and should be spending a lot more. And they really have to love somewhere, to put their money where their mouth is. And so that's why everything we've spoken about so far in terms of the presentation, the preparation, the promotion of your home is so important. But for buyer, just being confident in what you're willing to spend, what you can spend, and being as organized as you can financially and legally to actually proceed. Because again, with unique homes and naturally higher value homes, there's absolutely no risk, to be taken when it comes to putting those transactions together. And I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't know the financial situation or the legal situation of my buyers inside out, and likewise, for my clients, because we don't want to waste anybody's time. So I think for me that's probably those two pieces would be front of mind for me. Yeah.
I think it's great insight, and okay, talked about location a few times myself, and I have this come up with my clients, and it does sound obvious. You're right; it sounds obvious. You want to move and live in the right area, but um, we say it's obvious, but it still comes up as an issue. People trying to buy in the wrong area because they might like the house. And I think for anyone listening who is considering buying, a unique property, don't be necessarily swept up by the property itself. It has to, it has to work for you, your circumstances, your family, whatever it may be. So yeah, great to think, there.
Yeah, it is tricky. I've been there when I it's certainly not a unique or a beautiful or an expensive home, but when I bought my first home, I'd look anywhere really within, I guess half an hour, 45 minutes of where I lived at the time. And it was my partner at the time that picked our home, and we viewed it on a January evening. It was miserable and rainy and dark, and he loved it. And I was like, oh, it's okay. I haven't really got a clue where we are or, what's going on. And it was lucky that actually after we did eventually buy it, we moved in, you realize the things you love about somewhere that you wouldn't necessarily know on a viewing. And this is what I mean about seeing things at different times of day. My hallway became my favorite part of that home because it had two massive, great big sash windows. And it was west facing, and the hallway looked out onto this huge field, and the sun would set in the summer at the end of the field. And I wasn't to know that, having looked at it on a January evening. We liked it for other reasons then. But it is funny the things that you grow to really love about somewhere. And I'm lucky that I do love the area. I love where I live. But there are lots of people that will pick a house over a location, and they are the kind of people that after a couple of years will come to sell again because it just logistically doesn't work for them or whatever. But we try and feature the location in our videos. Again, we make reference to independent businesses or coffee shops or gyms, and our brochures have got a full section of where to go when you need. So supermarkets, local greengrocers, schools, golf clubs, gyms, again, tapping into that buying a lifestyle element that's really important to people. So hopefully you should be armed with all the information that you need if you read the brochure.
Neat. So, Grace, since you started Grace Greenhouse, what's been the standout highlight for you?
Oh gosh, there's been a lot. I think for me, we have had the pleasure of being, instructed on some incredible properties. We've just launched one this week at, with a value of £4 to £4.5 million, and that's not something that I could have. You always hope that that things like this would happen, but a year ago, setting out, that hadn't even crossed my mind. And yeah, I've got some really close relationships now, with my clients, one hoping to move in a couple of weeks' time, who just never thought the day would come, and we're kind of getting there on that. And, another couple who, fingers crossed, we're expecting an offer in this week on their home. And it's been a long journey for them too. And um, I think for me, when you kind of sit and you reflect on how business has grown and what you've achieved, estate agents and estate agency is very easy to get wrapped up in the facts and the figures and the finances, and all of that's very important, obviously. And you have to earn a living doing this, and everyone wants to do well from that perspective. But for me, the relationships that I've built and the value that I have added to those people and their experience of moving home far outweighs, the numbers that I can look at on my whiteboard here. And I think it's lovely to know that instructions, regardless of the value, but including, the value for £4.5 million, they chose me over, some really big corporate agents. And that is, hopefully, I think, a testament to the strength and the power of what we can deliver for people, but also hopefully my personality. I'm maybe not for everyone, none of us are, but I'm bubbly, I'm polite, I'm chatty, I work very hard. And I've got a great team of people. And if a conversation needs to be had, I'll pop round and have a cup of tea and a couple of biscuits to have it, as opposed to send you an email. And I think in this day and age, we're all busy and whatnot, but I think that human interaction is still really important. So I'm proud of that.
Yeah, I love it. So, Grace, what's in store for you and your business in 2025?
Well, we're predominantly operating now in two areas. We've got a great presence building in sort of the Hampshire, Surrey corner. So where I'm located is right sort of between three counties of Hampshire, Berkshire, and Surrey. But we've also started operating on the South Essex border. So we've got some fantastic listings coming up there, and some more listings coming up in Hampshire too. And yeah, some new team members hopefully joining us in a couple of months' time to sort of start spreading the word and really helping to propel that growth. but in a way that is sustainable. Because ultimately, the reasons that I've set this business up remain, regardless as to whether it's just me and a couple of others or whether there's, a team of us. And that's really important to me to maintain. So it's an exciting year of growth. I think the market definitely feels more positive than last year. Um, I think people are more settled and more sort of decisive after what was quite a confusing and tumultuous year last year. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the rest of the year has in store for sure.
And Grace, for anyone looking to find you and work with you, where do they need to go?
So, social media is a great starting point. So, Instagram and Facebook is under the handle at Grace Green Homes. Website is gracegreenhomes.com and email address is hello@gracegreenhomes.com. And you'll find everything that you need there, hopefully.
And I know you cover the home counties, Grace, but this is the South Coast property. So what do you enjoy most about the South Coast?
What a question. So I mean, I should have been an Aquarius. I joke about this all the time. And I'm not just saying this because I'm on the South Coast Property Podcast. I'm saying this because I'm a Taurus, so very stubborn. But I should have been an Aquarius because I just absolutely the water is my happy place. And yeah, most weekends I've got a crazy Cocker Spaniel who who does well after a good run around in the water and on the coast. So yeah, Milford's been one of our favourite spots for a good while. And along the Dorset coastline, is just beautiful. So less than an hour from home for me. And yeah, some gorgeous spots. Got some family just moved down towards Livington too. So I'm looking forward to spending much more time in your neck of the woods, John, for sure.
Grace, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
You.